Hi, good afternoon, good evening. We are super excited to have you with us here today. My name is Dr. Kyle Ann Hunter, and I am here joined with two of my favorite people to talk about a topic that is tough to talk about, but super necessary right now in particular. So we'll just go right out with it. And that is suicide and suicide prevention. Today we're coming to you right at the beginning of the holiday season, which in and of itself tends to be a super, super stressful time. And it is now there's this added layer of stress that we have with the pandemic and with the uncertainty of really what it's going to continue to look like. And we'll definitely be getting into that a lot more. But what we're here to talk about today is one new public service announcement that focuses on suicide prevention and really a particular aspect of suicide prevention, which is safe gun storage, which is something we know is also super important right now because we've just seen a huge increase in the number of gun sales during the pandemic. But before we jump into the meat of this, want to make sure I get to introduce my friends that I'm here with today. First, a little bit about myself. As I said, I'm Dr. Kyle Ann Hunter. I am a Marine Corps combat veteran. I flew Cobras, which is the best aircraft ever made, and I'll fight anybody who tells me otherwise. Even though they're retiring them, I guess that means we're officially old now, and like the aircraft you flew in the current wars is gone. But I'm also a professor of military and strategic studies at the United States Air Force Academy and a Sarah Brady Fellow at Brady, which I am super excited to be here. And I'm going to kick it now over to Heidi to let her introduce herself.
Thank you so much, my friend. It is always an honor to be with you, even though I wish it could be in person. My name is Dr. Heidi Kraft. I am a Navy combat veteran, a clinical psychologist by training and trade, and actually did fly in the Cobra once, Kai. I don't know if I ever told you that, but I was a flight surgeon, so I got to fly in a lot of different kinds of aircraft, but that was a thrilling ride. So I will agree with you, that was a super cool aircraft. As a clinical psychologist, I did spend some time with the Marines in Iraq in 2004 as part of a surgical company, which I think kind of shaped the way that the rest of my life would go, in that I think I didn't know that the rest of my professional life would be spent so focused on the mental health of our country's service members and veterans and their families. Of course, I loved it when I was wearing the uniform, but now it really is my passion. And I'm very, very pleased to be here representing PsychArmor Institute, which is a national nonprofit focused on educating a nation, trying to kind of get those of us who support veterans and their families to kind of understand that military culture. I am the chief clinical officer there and really pleased to be here with my friends to have this very important discussion.
And Ted?
And my name is Ted Bonar. I'm a clinical psychologist. I live in Columbus, Ohio. The honor is mine to be here and share this event with Kai and Heidi, as well as Brady and Stack Up and PsychArmor. I am not a veteran. I got to own that every time I do one of these kind of conversations. I'm a civilian, and I did one of my first clinical training placements was at the VA hospital in Chicago, the West Side VA, Jesse Brown. And just a couple of months into that clinical placement, I knew that this is what I wanted to do for my career, was working with veterans. And so one thing led to another, and I've been doing this work for a long time, primarily with the focus of working with military and veterans, as well as training other mental health professionals, psychologists, social workers, counselors, how to work with veterans and service members from the side of a civilian. It's one of my career goals and missions to close, or at least get a little bit closer to closed, the civilian military divide. So in my travels to come across and make friendships with Kai and Heidi and be colleagues with them I still wake up going, how did that happen? But I'm not going to give it back. I'm going to keep it. So I also founded a nonprofit earlier this year called the Clinical Readiness Project that is dedicated to providing training to other mental health providers. And one of the things that we talk about is lethal means safety and safe storage of firearms as a method of suicide prevention. So I hope I can contribute something along those lines tonight.
Yes, you definitely will, and like your friendship doesn't get to be taken back whether you wanted to or not. So
okay, well, good.
Yeah.
I'm glad that's settled.
We're fixed there. So that feeds in really nicely to just briefly what End Family Fire is all about. End Family Fire is a program that was launched by Brady in partnership with the Ad Council a little more than 2 years ago now, actually. And its original focus was around preventing unintentional shooting of children. And it's a program that is really focused on having these hard conversations about lethal means and safe storage. We know from a academic research perspective that properly storing your firearms is going to reduce the likelihood of injury or death by that firearm in your home very, very dramatically. And we know that suicide is the leading cause of gun death in this country. And so those two things together, meaning, if we can communicate that you store your gun safely, you're going to reduce the number one leading cause of gun deaths. But we also know that suicide's really hard to talk about just in and of itself. Even taking firearms out of the equation, it's still really hard. So that's why we started with unintentional shooting of kids, because we recognize that that's an easier into the conversation. But not one to shy away from hard conversations, knowing that we had to get into the suicide conversation. And so that's why we're all here today. And so how it's going to work here today is we're actually going to play for you the new public service announcement that's there. And we're going to play it all the way through, let you all see it. And then we're going to break it down and go through some of these key moments in the PSA and talk about what are the real life implications of it. What should we do if we find ourselves in this situation, either as somebody who is concerned about someone or they themselves are struggling. And I think we've got professional and personal experience, among this group across the spectrum here. So let's jump right in. And without further ado, let's see the full video through.
I'm at the house, and I'm gonna head inside. Okay, come on, this door. I'm in the house.
What do you see?
Let me check the den. There's nothing in the den. Let me check the kitchen. There's no one downstairs, it looks like.
Wait, what was that?
I don't know. Let me head upstairs.
What do you see?
What the? Did you shut this bathroom door?
No.
Oh,
What?
It's not here.
What do you mean?
The gun's not here.
What? Where is it?
Oh my God.
What's going on?
Cam.
Oh my God.
So I know that's hard for a lot of people to watch, a lot of people to see. Before we get into some of the breakdowns, Heidi and Ted, from a clinical perspective, what do you see when you see this? And whether it's clinical or actually even your own experiences in dealing with this trauma, what really stands out to you when you watch this through?
Heidi, go ahead.
The first time I saw it took my breath away. It actually was hard to breathe, and I'm not sure whether others in the audience are feeling the same way, but it's beautifully done. I really hats off to the team that put this together, because I think it goes to this visceral reaction that we all have that, as you wisely said, is so difficult to talk about. Clinically, I feel an anticipation of the pain, the trauma, the shame, the blame, the confusion, the chaos of suicide loss, and it's so multifactorial and it's so complex, and I feel it acutely.
Yeah, and I feel, I mean, I feel the same, and I pinpoint a few things that we'll get into a little more in detail, but one of the things that happens about with suicide is this feeling of, I just don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know how I'll react to somebody else who's in a crisis. If somebody's in a crisis, what do I do? Am I going to do the right thing? Am I going to, right? And that is a fear that it's just ever present, and it's so intense. Like, the anxiety is so intense to have a friend who you might be worried about, a family member that you might be worried about. I'm worried about my buddy. I'm worried about my son. Am I doing the right thing? How can I do this? And I think this video really brings it to life, of this super intense moment of, what did something happen? Did something happen? I got to check this room. I got to check this room. And then I know we'll talk about this later. When it hits me, when I see the phone and how many times somebody's tried to contact somebody, and then when somebody's going upstairs and it gets more intense. I'll save a couple of things until we get to it in detail, but the tension builds, right? And as a psychologist, it's as somebody who's worked with people that tell these stories, those are the moments of, did I do something right? What did I miss? And as Heidi, as you were saying, like, suicide is so complicated. There's so many things that go into it. So I see a lot of these things building up and playing out. And at the same time, it's not something that anybody is necessarily doing wrong or blaming themselves for. But it's so intense. Some of those questions are inevitable. So I'm looking forward to talking maybe about some of these specific moments when they entered the bedroom. I want to talk about something in there. So.
Yeah, I mean, so with this, let's really start to break this down, because I think we can, this hard, messy, difficult, uncomfortable topic, hopefully by breaking this down a little bit, we can actually start to wrap our hands around some manageable solutions, for lack of a better term, that we can all actually partake in. So let's play the first 8 seconds of this here.
And I'm gonna head inside. Okay, come on. This door. I'm gonna head inside. Okay, come on. This door. I'm in the house. I'm gonna head inside.
So, here we see someone coming up to the house. Clearly there's some concern, there's some anticipation, there's this sense that, okay, I've got to get to the house, I've got to get in. There's some panic coming through the door. And I think, just to sort of hit the technical side of this off the bat, that I think leads to some of the tension, is like, this is very clearly modeled in the design of a first-person shooter game. And I think, when we look at that, we have this sense that, like, okay, there's going to be some bad guy in the house that we have to get at. That idea, that sort of almost initial, like, okay, I'm there, I'm ready to go do this mission idea. And I think one of the things that's so powerful about the medium here, and sort of jumping the gun, to pardon the pun, till we get to the end, though, is that so often in these games, the gun is that positive thing. You always find it ends up sort of saving the day. I think there's a little bit of that anticipation when you start this, of thinking like, oh, okay, they're going to go get the bad guys, quote unquote, from coming into this. So what do you all hear when you're scene, this beginning, very obviously it's in video game style. There's this anticipation. How does that start to set the stage really for how serious this is?
Do you want to start?
I just sense that it's chaos, right? That, this is one of those moments in somebody's life where, whatever happened before this, somebody got a call, like the first person, the perspective, somebody got a call and had to rush home, and they're coming up and the door might be locked, and what's behind the door, so many unknowns, so many questions, all happening so quickly, so fast, with no information. It's chaos. It's hard to put this together in the moment, right? And, I think about, there's a difference here between maybe this and somebody's military or combat experience, where even something that can happen so fast and so intense and so chaotic, there can also be training for that kind of an event, right? In that kind of a situation where there can be knowledge of what might be happening. This in a home situation, it's hard to train for this, right? You get a phone call, you rush home, the door is locked. What's on the other side of the door, right? No matter how trained somebody is with firearms, with any kind of intense situation, if you don't know what's on the other side of that door, that's going to be experience that's going to impact somebody.
Well, and I think from a combat perspective, and Heidi, I'm really interested in your thoughts on this too. When we're downrange, we expect bad things to happen. We are in this heightened crisis, adrenaline-filled moment all the time. We constantly live in this state of being prepared for the next bad thing that's going to happen, and it's a alertness that is omnipresent. It's always there. You're always on alert. You're always expecting the bad to happen. When we get home, we don't want to think that that's the case. We don't want it when we're home. We want that to be a place that is comfortable, that is safe, that we can actually relax. That sense that, like, I can just let that part of me go, which I know whole nother issue is super hard for a lot of us to do when we get back, is to actually relax on that time. I have to go huck my mountain bike off like 15-foot drops to relax myself nowadays. But it's you want to have that relaxation. So Heidi, where do you put this sense that this sort of tension that you're feeling actually in your home, as opposed to when you might be downrange and you're more used to feeling something like that?
The thing that strikes me is that what we are feeling as the person approaches the door is like classic, like fight or flight, right? Mm-hmm. We are feeling that adrenaline, that stress response that serves us well downrange, or serves us well if we're facing this danger. It's well acted in that we feel it in the actor, but also we see the actor not able to open the door. And we're all familiar with those moments where the fight or flight's kicking in and things don't work the way we think they should, and he can't open the door, and he's panicking about that. So this is the unfortunately sort of classic additional stress response that, for those of us that work with veterans who are trying to find that ability to come down from previous experiences, not just veterans, anyone who's experienced trauma, we try to come down from that life up here in the kind of continual fight or flight that comes with trauma. We slowly come down from it. This is a reemergence of that feeling. So it's very clear that we're back in an acute stress response.
Yeah, and I know for me, this has been really hard to watch, because I've been the person on the other side of that door, the person who was very, very ready to take my own life because I didn't know how to navigate that return home. I didn't know how to navigate either the physiological feelings I was feeling of coming into an environment where I didn't have to be 100% in the fight mode. It's not an easy way to re-enter when you show back up in society and you're like, oh, I don't have to go fly out and kill people today. That's not my job. Like it's hard. Like, so that physiological stress response plus the emotional just misunderstanding of who I was, where I was, and a bit of an extra layer of being a woman where nobody really believed I did a lot of what my story, my life. There was a lot of assumptions made about my past based on my gender and how I look. So I think it added this extra layer, and it's really hard for me, now a decade removed from that experience, to watch this too and thinking of, I was very fortunate that somebody intervened, but to think, now to kind of turn the tables and think what it's like to be in those shoes and the panic and the fear that was likely being felt, in which, at the time I wasn't capable of feeling much of anything.
Which we will talk about, I hope.
Yes.
That this is the whole point of this conversation, is that when you are in those shoes you're describing, there's this inability to think creatively or flexibly, and it's a really important part of why it's so important for us to have this conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And with that, let's move on to the next discussion point here at 24 seconds.
I'm in the house.
What do you see?
Let me check the den. There's nothing in the den. Let me check the kitchen. There's no one downstairs, it looks like.
Wait, what was that?
So we see him in the house getting oriented, looking for things here, and we're going to get to the phone in a minute, why we deliberately stopped it here on the phone. But again, there's a continuation of some of the the panic, the building, the stress. What else is noticeable to all of you when he's actually coming into the house, when he makes it in?
What I notice is that there are no questions that have been answered by getting on the other side of that door, right? The questions continue and the intensity gets raised and raised and raised. And this is the experience of a suicide crisis, that if we're worried about somebody, that person is experiencing an increased amount of pain, an increased amount of distress. And like, this is the problem of suicide. So somebody might say, I'm in pain, I want relief from this pain. At its core, that's what suicide is. And so this is like how somebody else is experiencing somebody's experience of that, if that makes sense. Right? Somebody else is going through this rising level of pain, and they're trying to find something else. And then me, you, somebody else that cares about that person is also going to experience that intensity, that rising intensity. And there's not a lot of, in the moment, it's hard to identify, what can we do? What can we do to answer one of these questions, find out what's happening? That's what I get from this search of the first floor. Is I still don't know, and this intensity is going even higher.
Well, and the other thing is, you almost feel a sense of relief that he doesn't find anything on the first floor.
That's right.
Right? Like, you see him saying, "Oh, there's no one here. There's no one on the first floor," and it's like everyone collectively takes a breath. Okay, and then you sort of realize, oh, there's stairs. Okay, he's going to go upstairs. Right. And then the tension builds again. But I think we're going with him on these waves of fear. It's like horror, abject horror. I think from the point of view of, I'm assuming this is the person's father and mother that are on the phone. But I don't know that for sure, and we'll probably never know. But as a parent, that's the way I project it. And as a parent, there's nothing in the world that is scarier than this.
And I know I'm jumping in here a little quick, Kai, but
Jump on in. That's why we're here to have a conversation.
It just seems like this is it, right? The reason the phone gets me so hard is so it might be mom and dad, but it could be anybody. And who among us leaves our phone away from us, right? Who among us in 2020 is like leaving our phone? Like, if there's a phone and there's not a person there, I wonder what went wrong, right? Yeah. Somebody made a mistake, somebody missed something went wrong. So to go into a home and to see that phone there and have everything be quiet and then see all these missed messages, that's to me the moment when my anxiety just goes through the roof.
Yeah. And for me, it's hard too, I think, to see it just, based on my personal experiences too, knowing that, Cam, the person in this thing, people are clearly trying to reach him, reach out to him, reach stuff. And I can guarantee you Cam feels like it doesn't matter.
That's right.
And I think it's this gets to, I think some of the, especially when we're talking about lethal means, gets to the root of some of this, is that we often try to tiptoe around the conversation. We sort of tiptoe like, oh, it might be okay. I just want to see how you're doing. I wouldn't believe you'd actually do anything that bad or that wrong. Mm. We don't have those direct, blunt conversations around, are you considering kill yourself? Do you have access to a gun to be able to do it? Do you have a plan? Those direct, hard questions. I think I can guarantee you Cam doesn't feel like it doesn't matter if people are reaching out to him. He still doesn't feel that way.
I think you're right. I think the phone being left behind is a warning sign, right? There are a lot of different types of warning signs for suicide. We could have a conversation about warning signs, and we could put 12 or 14 things up on a slide, and like, here's a warning sign, here's a warning sign. The truth is that there are hundreds and thousands and infinite numbers of warning signs, and something as simple as a phone on the counter in the right context isn't just a warning sign. It's a warning sign that something is desperately wrong, right?
Yes.
I'm glad you brought that up, Guy.
The person has decided to disconnect.
That's right.
The person has made a conscious decision. Well, and you notice too that the first person, the male voice that we hear that's talking to the woman, he doesn't tell her what he sees too, right? She says, "What's that?" Because she hears the vibration of the phone.
That's right.
And he says, "Never mind," and he keeps going. And I think that's a, really sort of obvious, like he knows how serious it is that the phone is sitting there and Cam isn't there, but he doesn't want to say it.
Yeah. That saying it makes it feel real.
Yep.
In a lot of ways. And so, with that, let's head upstairs with him and see how things progress here.
I don't know. Let me head upstairs.
What do you see?
What the?
And so, I think this is one of the big parts that gets me a lot. 'Cause, like, to Heidi's point, there's almost this sense that, like, well, he's not downstairs, so you think everything might be fine. Like there's almost this sense at the beginning that, like, oh, we're gonna find Cam sitting and playing video games on his couch, like that. And if he's not there, then we're not worried about him. He's over at, whoever's house. He's over at, Sue's house playing video games. So there's that. And then I think this moment where you get to the beginning of the bedroom door, there's this very real sense that everything is not okay. And for me, this is the point that it clicks. You can almost feel the emotion, I think, of the first person here, that things are clicking, that there's something seriously, seriously wrong. Like the phone, I think, is sort of the first, like, I've got to be more urgent. But this really seems to be the moment that we know something went wrong.
when he asks the woman, "Did you close this bathroom door?" I had a friend of mine that I went to college with had her son die by suicide in a bathroom. And it was so hard for me to watch that scene because I didn't know what was going to happen next. Were they going to open the door? And so I think that many of us probably felt that visceral feeling of, again, we're riding the waves of the anxiety that comes with the relief that he's not there. But yeah, things are getting more intense.
And I'm just, when I watch this, I just hear the silence of the house. There's a chaotic search happening. The guy's out of breath. We're hearing the phone conversation, but there's nothing else. Like, you go through somebody's house, you can tell generally if somebody else is in the house. And I just hear nothing but silence. They're opening the door, and there's no TV, there's no radio, there's no music, there's no conversation, there's nobody saying, "Why are you running up the stairs like that?" Right? It just fills me with that silence.
Yeah, and it's not like you're hearing loud music to know why they wouldn't be hearing you come up the stairs, because they're there. Yeah, and another thing that really hits me at this point too is it's almost a bit of a transition, I feel like, from looking just for a person to looking for something else too, that you start to get this sense that, we will talk in a moment about actually not finding the gun and what that's all about. But there tends to be almost now this dual tension that you can start to feel between, I need to find Cam, and also this bit of this like, oh shit moment, I have a gun in the house and I need to look out for that too. Because I know this is one of the biggest fears that comes from anyone who owns guns, like myself included in this one, is, when something goes wrong, is your gun going to be what's actually used and a part of it? And that, I think you start to see this now torn almost sense of like, I need to find him and I need to find this thing, that you can tell there's something else that he's also looking for. And, there's been, whether it's from unintentional shootings, school shootings, suicide, it's been ample times when there's been a notification of a death or a tragedy. It's the first reaction goes and looks, and like this pain of like, oh my God, my guns are gone. What actually happened? And I think it leads into this conversation of what the responsibility of gun ownership also is.
Yeah, and as I watch this, and that starts to dawn on me that just exactly what you're saying, that he's not just looking for Cam, but he's also looking for a gun. That's when I start to go, oh no, right? Knowing that there may or is probably a gun in the house, knowing how dangerous that is for somebody who is experiencing a suicide crisis. Suicide crises are dangerous inherently, right? There are other ways, there are many ways to die by suicide, to make a suicide attempt. If there is a gun in the house, it is the most dangerous method of suicide, full stop. Like, nothing else is even close. Right. And that's when that starts to come into my awareness as a viewer of this PSA, that's when I start to go, oh no, something's happening.
Well, and I think let's play to the next one, and then Heidi, I've got some specific questions, thoughts for you. So let's play to that 40-second mark here now.
Did you shut this bathroom door?
No.
Oh,
what?
It's not here.
What do you mean?
The guy.
So now there's no question that they're looking for a gun. That's there. But I think something that is important to talk to, we need to engage with about, is really some of this unique relationship that veterans have with guns. I think when we talk about this to the civilian population, it's been in my experiences working with End Family Fire for now a little over 2 years, working with Brady for a little longer than that as well, having the conversation to non-veterans of, you need to lock up your guns because it's dangerous and it might hurt somebody. That's totally oversimplifying the conversation, but just among us friends, we'll make it simple here. Having that conversation with civilians becomes a little bit easier because it becomes easier for them to say, you know what, yes, you're right. This is dangerous. I should lock it up because it's the right thing to do. It's much more complicated to talk to veterans about this because I think two things that I have found, and Heidi, really am interested in your experience having lived in both worlds with it, is one, for a big proportion of the veteran community, the lethality of guns is not theoretical. When you talk to a lot of civilians about this and you say it's lethal, it's dangerous, it's very theoretical. Most civilians, very, very thankfully, will never have to pull a trigger in anger. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing that they won't have to do that. And so the actual lethality, especially against humans, is very theoretical when it comes to guns. For veterans, it's not. That's not a theoretical thing. And so there's a very real understanding and belief of that. And the other side is that for many of us, this lethal thing is the reason we're still alive too, because it killed somebody else. So there's this mixed positive, negative, it's often the cause of some of these PTSD symptoms, but also almost a security blanket feeling. So we'd love to hear you talk a little bit about navigating that unique relationship that we have with guns.
Unique relationship is an understatement. I think I probably couldn't, I couldn't even start to list the number of times I have talked to patients about this, my active duty patients, my veteran patients, and really sitting with them and exploring what this means to them, what their weapons mean to them. And as you very wisely say, Kai, it is so much more than just a weapon they have for protection, or just a weapon they have because they like to shoot for fun, or just a weapon because it's cool. It is interlaced in their identity, and it's interlaced in experiences where that weapon meant something much, much more. So I agree. I'm sure you, like I, Kai, when you got home from combat, even as a clinical psychologist, I found myself going for my holster. Like when I got home, it wasn't there. And it's this sense of being really vulnerable without it. And that I was never a person that carried a weapon. So this was a unique experience for me that has transcended my life as well. So it's complicated. It is multifaceted for people. And I think as clinicians, it is on us to have that discussion, to find out with our patients what these weapons that they have at home mean to them. What are we talking about here, right? It's more than just a handgun that they think is cool. I guarantee it's more, which is why it isn't so simple. Hey, you're having a rough time. Let's lock this up. That's a different conversation with a veteran than it is for a civilian. I hate to generalize like that because it's not always the case, but I think it's just, you have to go a couple layers deeper in order to establish what you're trying to achieve there and have that person understand it.
Yeah, and I think for me it struck like it was what you said about reaching for your holster, not knowing it was there. I think that is something that is so subconscious and not really discussed all that often because, again, we're always like, it's just there. I know for me, when I got back, as a pilot, we had 9mm on us all the time, 24/7, everywhere we went. It got so like I actually started walking. I was used to having the weight. It's not that they're not that heavy, but they are weight on you, and enough that you adjust your gait. When I got home, I was so used to walking, always having a pistol holster on my leg where it was for the thing. I ended up pulling a muscle coming back because I was so used to favoring walking one way and not having the weight there. But it's one of those situations that we don't really think about because it becomes so innate and self-conscious or subconsciously ingrained in us that that pistol just always there. It becomes a bit of an extension and a part of you. And also some of the almost, I'm going to use the term mythology, and my fellow Marines will probably come in like, slaughter me after this one. But, the mythology around the importance of your weapons to yourself and your sense of being and who you are, it really is an extension of you for the way you treat it, the way, it's also too, the care is weapon, gear, self. You take care of your weapon first, then your gear, and then you go eat and feed yourself. So even just that, being super ingrained into you, I think there's a very unique relationship that exists. And simply saying, well, just lock it up might not work.
Right. I remember having deployed with the Marines as a Navy provider, I learned very quickly that I was more afraid of actually being physically injured in combat than I was more afraid of losing my weapon than I was of being physically injured in combat. Way more afraid. Like, that was terrifying to me that something would happen to that weapon. And so
we kept Marines out patrolling areas in training till like 2 days later if they lost anything. So,
that's the thing. All the folklore came with us. But it was like a fear worse than death. And we sort of joke around about it, but that was serious. And so I mean, my goodness, it becomes something different. And so when I have had these conversations especially with active duty Marine patients of mine who are really struggling with mental health concerns and are really at high risk, I have to tread carefully here because I can very quickly have them just shut me off. And then we've closed a door and we're not having this conversation anymore. So, and I know, Ted, you're really the expert in this. I mean, I continue to learn from you, but.
Well, that's the piece that interests me. But what you're both talking about, like if we're talking about the culture of the military and what weapons mean to a service member or a veteran, and then we can extend that idea. What does a weapon mean to somebody who is in the firearm culture, just firearm in general? Like, why do people own firearms, right? So as a psychologist, when I watch this video and I see the drawer open up and the ammunition rolling around in there, the loose ammunition, right? So first of all, it's like, okay, now we've got an emergency. Like, we kind of already knew it was an emergency, but there's no question, right? And what's interesting to me, and what I think that we all need to be working towards, is this moment of connecting what you're talking about. What do firearms mean to the individual with where and how is a gun stored when there's a crisis? Because if you don't appreciate that, if a mental health provider, if a psychologist, social worker, counselor, anybody doesn't appreciate that and just says, well, you got to get rid of your gun. Well, from what you're talking about, like, that's a non-starter. You can't have that conversation and just say, oh, well, Kai, you just got to get rid of your gun. Like, if I say it that way, I completely disrespect everything that you both have just been talking about. Everything about the training and the meaning and the value and the purpose of and so many other things, right? So I can't have the conversation about safe storage or where's the gun unless I meet you from the place of culture and meaning and depth and understanding. And if I can do that, then I can say, this isn't about gun control. This isn't about taking away your weapons. This isn't about saying that you had bad training. This isn't saying that, this is a bad idea for the rest of your life. This is saying there's somebody in your house who's in a crisis. So how can we care for the crisis, right? And I think that that's where the conversation is so important, right? That, why is that ammunition loose? And, where was the gun, right?
And that hits on what I really want to move into next, but let's play the video to the end to really hit on that point.
Gun's not here.
What? Where is it?
Oh my God.
What's going on?
Cam.
Oh my God.
So we've seen this through now, and we see we see at the end calling for Cam, and I think one of the things that really hits me with this is that this was whoever this is, whether it's father or uncle, it feels that way. This was probably his gun, and now somebody he clearly cares about quite a bit has used it to end his life. And I think this is one of the things we can look at from a perspective of, is it father-child relationship? Is it just somebody who knew that his buddy had a gun and, came over a lot? We don't know. We can anticipate that. But the sense that, the first person that we're seeing through their eyes, it is their gun. And one of the things, we've been talking around how to have this conversation really. And, I think it's something that nobody intrinsically, or very few people, I won't say nobody as a good social scientist, that's a bad thing to ever say, like put absolutes on things, but very few people ever say, yes, I'm going to go buy a gun and probably kill myself with it. That does happen, but that's very, very rare. And so one of the things I think that's interesting, and one of the things that we're really trying to do with End Family Fire, is have this conversation as an extension about protection. There is this belief that guns are protective. We know for veterans, this isn't theoretical. It's often been very protective for us. And so locking it up, having the conversation that it may not be your life you saved, it might be somebody else's life that you saved that is important here. So how do you see that around having that conversation? And clearly that's a conversation that needs to happen before an immediate crisis. That's not something that when someone's in an immediate crisis. But when you think about this from a life cycle of being a clinician and working with people, how does sort of coming in with it, through the back door, for lack of a better term here, and saying, this isn't about you being suicidal. This is about protecting other people you care about. Have you had success? Is that something that you have experience with?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there are, we can talk about different ways to have that conversation for hours, right? Because clinical work with all sorts of different types of people can be really hard. There's a lot of different kinds of conversations that can be had. But one of the best ways that I think gets at your question is this simple idea of honing in on, here's a moment of danger. What can we do to get through the danger, right? And there's a really easy metaphor that I think we can use, or comparison, is drinking and driving. Like back in the day, it wasn't like this. We didn't really look down on drinking and driving, something you got away with. Cops let you go. And I'm talking, decades ago, I'm talking 40 years ago, that, you could drink and get pulled over or hit something and it just didn't carry the weight that drinking and driving carries today. And the reason for that was there were decades worth of awareness of the problem of drinking and driving, that if you've had too much to drink, driving is a bad idea, right? And so now it's fairly well, of course not 100%, but it's fairly well understood that if you're drinking, you can give your keys to somebody else. These days, you can get Uber. Like well, not that anybody's going out right now, but you can get Uber or a Lyft or a cab, or who's the designated driver. And these are really easy things to understand that most people don't fight about anymore, or most people don't object to. Sure, there are some people, but it's a really nice framework to say, this isn't that you can't have your car. This isn't that I want your keys forever. It's when you've had 12 to 15 drinks, less, but to make the point, if you've had 12 drinks, not the right time to drive home, right? So let's just find another way, right? Because I don't want you to be the one driving. So somebody else can drive. And that metaphor, that comparison into where's the gun when there's a crisis, I think that's a really important way to frame the conversation with somebody who's in distress or somebody who has a family member who's in distress. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think, it this notion of family members in distress too, Heidi would want to hear from you a little bit right now, from a perspective of military and veterans. We often think about the service member as being the one, and clearly the service members do have a higher than average likelihood. We're disproportionately represented in firearm suicide in particular, and that's a whole other conversation we can get into. But family members as well are at risk. So how do you have these conversations with service members as well about the stress that their families might be under?
I think, interestingly, that service members and veterans know this better than anyone, that their families are under great stress. I think they want people to know that their families serve with them, that their families have sacrificed a great amount during their deployments and during their service. And so it is a matter, I think, of coming in that way and like, tell me about your family. Tell me what this has been like with your family. And as that conversation evolves, it has been my clinical experience that my patients, if they are the veterans or the service members, they're the ones that know. They know. And sometimes it just takes starting that conversation to really be able to see how concerned they actually are. And then to your point about how our first person guy in the game, in the PSA, we start to feel empathy for him. What if this weapon was used? We can start to feel how terrified he is that this weapon was just taken out of this drawer. And so I think, at least in the conversations I've had with patients who are concerned about someone in their families, this is an easy transition for them to make. That, not my weapons. Not my weapons. Like, we will figure this out. So, but then the logistics part is where it gets hard, right? So now what are we going to do? How are we still going to have access to the protection that we feel like we want while also securing our families? And so, thankfully there's a lot of interesting new options that are out there as far as firearm security. And my patients have been willing to have those conversations. Back a while ago when I was seeing active duty Marine patients, I was actually able to convince a couple different people to have a friend in the unit come and get the weapons and just keep them for you. So I think there's
that helped me. That was much more what seemed like a good idea for me at the time too. And I think being willing to be creative and engaging in those conversations is important. And I want to wrap it up though, talking about what is the very unsubtle elephant in everybody's room right now, which is COVID. We're all living with it here, and the realities that's become. We know that from the onset of the pandemic, we saw a huge increase in gun sales. The Brady background check system hit a all-time record in the number of background checks were performed, which is good. We're happy that background checks are being performed and that the system's working that way. But we also know there's just a lot more guns in homes. And in the early research that's coming out, we know that this is a different demographic of gun owner than we think of as the traditional, more, as they often refer to as, like, hereditary gun owners, people who've been around guns their entire life. These are a lot of first-time private gun owners, buying their own, even if they were military, law enforcement, and had professional guns. This is a lot of people's first time of buying a gun for their own use. If we think about family fire broadly as being a shooting involving a improperly stored or misused gun that's found in the home, and we see COVID, we know we're going into now winter, the holiday season. while we're seeing spikes in a lot of places, there's been a lot more restrictions put on movements, gatherings, all of this, so we have this, COVID lockdown bad for people in that sort of mental health on top of holidays, which are already stressful, plus a lot of new guns out there in new homes. And so when we're looking at the holiday season, the holiday time, how do we broach this conversation with our friends and families who may have never owned guns before, we never thought of as being gun owners, who now have a greater than 0% chance of actually having a gun in their home and coming into this time of stress, which I'll say it's like super stressful on me right now. My husband, who does all of our cooking, is broken and can't walk, and our kitchen's torn up on top of it anyway. So let's add like one more thing to the holiday stress, like, and I have like 80,000 finals to grade. But how do we have these conversations in really stressful times when we're not physically present with people?
Go ahead, Heidi.
Well, so I've always, every time I ever get the chance to talk about this, I always say the same thing. There's one way to ask people that you're concerned about. Are you thinking about killing yourself? The reason that's the way to ask is that there's no misinterpreting that question, right? And so it's important enough that we should ask it so that no one can misinterpret it, so that it's not, a double negative or whatever, right? We're just asking it the way we want it answered. We want people to understand. I would probably contend that we're in the same boat here, Kai, in that if I'm even the slightest bit kind of checking in on someone that I'm a little concerned about, I am asking the question, is there a firearm in the house? Now, like you said, there's a greater chance there is. People we didn't even know have them now have them. So I'm asking point blank, again, bad pun. I'm asking, why are all these gun puns coming up?
Everything is a gun metaphor.
It's horrible. I don't even use that pun. Why did I use it? So I'm asking directly, right? Is there a firearm in the house? And if the answer is yes, how are you securing it right now? What do you have in? And Ted's got his little lock. There's fingerprint safes now. There's a lot of different ways to talk about this. Ted, what do you think?
I want to talk about this really quickly. So Heidi, of course you're exactly right. And then the conversation is, so how is it stored? And is the ammunition, where's the ammunition stored? Is the ammunition and the firearms stored together? Are they stored separately? Is anything locked? As simple as this is a very inexpensive gun safety measure, right? There are a lot of different types of safe storage methods. And many gun owners will say, oh, that's easy to, all I need is a cable cutter. I can get through that really quickly. Sure, that's true. And this slows down the process. This is one barrier in between a person in distress and a usable firearm. So I think about, so this won't be effective for every gun owner, right? But I think about that video. And if Cam doesn't have, if a pistol has a gun cable lock on it and the keys aren't with it and there aren't cable cutters nearby, the chances are greatly improved that Cam's life is not lost, right? So not perfect, imperfect, but inexpensive and easy, and it's an important barrier. And these are the conversations that we have to have with especially new gun owners, well, with all gun owners, but new gun owners aren't traditional gun owners with the same values of safety. I mean that very particularly. We know that that firearm safety is a training and it's valued in that culture. Somebody that's bought a weapon over the last 6 months may not have that, right? It goes back to Kai, your setup. So we can be a part of that conversation. We don't have to be experts in it. We can just simply say, how's it stored? The
other thing that's really important here is that I think a lot of people don't know what Ted just said, if we can put even a few minutes, even a minute in between a suicidal crisis and the means that that person was planning to use, even 1 minute could save a lot of lives, because we don't think, during a suicidal crisis, we think very narrowly, and I think a lot of people think, well, if we stop one possible means, someone will just find another way to do it. That's just not true. And I think the general understanding of this is false. People don't know that as a fact. And it is a fact backed by decades of research now. So it matters to even put a minute, even having to go look for a cable cutter. That in and of itself would be enough time for a lot of people.
Sharing that with people is so powerful. When we were doing the End Family Fire research, to back up what we wanted to do, it was exactly that. The number one thing people say is like, oh, well, they'll just find another means. It doesn't matter what I do. If someone wants to kill themselves, they'll kill themselves. But when you start to talk through it, you really see people's, the light bulbs start coming on in people's head of like, oh, so it's not that hard. It's not that. And you start to walk them through the process and the logic, and you see them come into that. And so that's, at endfamilyfire.org, that's one of the things we try to walk people through, is really that logic chain in a, simple pictorial way of this one small, and I think to Ted's point of being perfect, nothing's perfect, but it's also somewhat similar of preaching like abstinence only education. We also know that doesn't prevent pregnancy, unwanted pregnancy. That saying just don't have sex isn't going to stop people from unwanted pregnancy. That's much right. Like saying, just don't have guns around isn't going to actually work. And so constantly looking, one of the things we really try to do with the End Family Fire program is constantly look for this, what's the next level of protection you can put on that's also right for your situation? Because that's the other, and I think to go back to Ted's discussion before about drinking and driving, I think having this conversation, that it parallels alcohol in so many ways. Because when you have, young kids in the home, you have this concern, that toddlers are said with all due love and affection, but toddlers are stupid. They are supposed to be. They are not, that's said with love. They are supposed to also developmentally, experiment to learn. Experiential learning in the physical world is important for toddlers, which is why we child-proof homes. And so how you need to protect, store your gun safely for that starts to become now very different than when you have a teenager who is going to be actively looking for it. Much like alcohol, when you have little kids around, you don't want, little Tommy picking up the wine glass because he sees mommy doing it and wants to be like her and drink. So it's that, how are you protecting from that unintentional, versus when you have teenagers who are going to be going and seeking it out. And so what I think an important part of this conversation is, what's the next level of safety that's good, but that's also appropriate for where you are in your life. And that's why I think this notion too of like letting your buddies keep it for a little while, because it's not permanent. It's not saying you'll never be able to, but going back to alcohol, if I see you drinking more heavily than usual, I'll probably say like, hey, let's have a conversation about why, like 4 drinks, okay, 13 drinks, what are you doing? Because apparently that's now our level, right, Ted? Like 13, then we'll take your keys away. Yeah. No, but understanding that, and I think it's why we need to destigmatize asking questions about guns. Yeah. Because, for some people, having 18 guns is normal. They've always had 18 guns in their life, and that's fine. For somebody else, if they're like, yeah, I just went out and bought 18 guns, you might want to be like, okay.
I'm fortunate to, I feel it's fortunate, but I do some fitness for duty evaluations for law enforcement. And I recently had an individual, we're having a conversation about firearms, and this person's a firearm instructor. And And I ask, so how many guns do you have, or something like that? And how many firearms do you have in the house? He goes, I have a small arsenal. I could take out a small air assault. And, this wasn't, it was a perfectly fine conversation. We respected each other. It wasn't defensive. It was purely informational, right? And he didn't say it with he had a little bit of a wink in his eye, but he was also totally, telling me the truth about the amount of, and he says, and I keep them all in a safe, and I keep them all in ammunition stored separately. And he's a firearms instructor. I expect this. And I said, so do you ever have access to a weapon? Do you store any of the weapons outside of that safe? He goes, oh, well, my service my service firearm. So I'm not worried about the small arsenal that he has locked up. I'm worried about the one service weapon that he has, right? And that's the question. Okay, so now if you've had too much to drink and you're thinking about suicide, where's that weapon? Is it possible that you could store that one with the others, right? It becomes a conversation about how do you manage that when somebody's had a few too many? That's the one I'm worried about.
Yeah. Alcohol is such a major risk factor for the sort of entry into suicidal crises. It's so true. And so it actually is helpful if you're talking clinically with someone, and I suppose non-clinically as well. It's helpful to sort of talk through that possibility. What about if you've been drinking, right? Mm-hmm. Then what? And most people could probably at least go there with you. Think about, oh yeah, that's true. I might not think through that the same way. And we certainly know that's it's a pretty major correlate of completed suicides.
Yeah.
So it's important to just bring it up.
Yeah. These are, and I think especially right now when people are more isolated and we don't see their things like drinking habits, substance habits as much because they're alone and they're at home, and you can hide some of those other like warning signals. And so with that, I want to wrap up by asking you both, what is the thing going into this season where we're going to be probably seeing friends and family virtually quite a bit more? What's the one thing that you really want folks to take away from this conversation about, what they should be talking to their friends and families about right now?
I'm going to start, Ted.
Sure. I'll say maybe two, maybe three things. One is basic, and it comes right off your question. What do I want them to be talking with their friends and family about? I want them to be talking with their friends and family. I'll start that basic. This is an isolating time. And, that might depend a little bit on geography. I live in Columbus, Ohio. We're going to get somewhere between 5 and 9 inches of snow on Monday. And the COVID numbers are climbing high. We're going inside for a couple of months, right? Half the country is going to go inside for a couple of months between weather and COVID numbers. The other half of the country is going to be really worried about COVID numbers. So we're going inside. We've got to simply talk with our friends and family, and we have to know what's going on in their lives, and we have to take the extra mile. Some people are like, I don't like Zoom. I don't like making phone calls. I just want to text people. I don't care how we do it. We just need to keep reaching out to people. And Zoom isn't perfect, and there's a lot of imperfect ways to communicate and keep our connections with people, but we have to use the imperfect methods to stay connected. As far as what to talk about with people that we're concerned about, noticing and saying, I'm concerned about you. I just want to check in. How you doing? Anything going on? And then from there, Heidi said it very clearly, and she said it perfectly. If we're really worried and we see somebody going down, so are you thinking about killing yourself? And we can ask that question. We do not put it in somebody's minds. We do not encourage people by asking that question. That question can be a lifesaver. It allows people to talk about what they're worried about. And then, I mean, this is what we've been talking about for the last 20 plus minutes is, can we talk about, so do you have access to a firearm, right? Where do you keep the firearms? Where do you keep the ammunition? You know, is there anybody that can hold on to your ammunition for a little bit, you know, just till we get through this, till you get through that? There's a lot of different ways those conversations play out. They're not super easy if you haven't practiced. It's okay to practice, right? So I'm going to start with stay connected. Stay connected, stay connected, stay connected. And then let's not be afraid of these specific conversations. We can have them.
Yeah, really just true. Social support is everything. And we know that health psychology wise, clinical psych wise, social support's everything. So find a way. The other thing I always tell people is you do not need to be a mental health provider to ask that question. If you are worried about someone, trust your gut feeling and ask the question. Okay, so the answer is no. Great. The answer is no. We're back to where we started, right? If the answer is yes, all you have to do is stay with the person, whatever that looks like, and get to the next level of help. You do not need to be a mental health provider to be able to save someone's life. And so I teach that anytime I have the ability for people to listen to me, I try to just say it over and over and over again. Every one of us can do this, and we should. So otherwise, just what Ted said.
I say, as the non-mental health provider, as some people like to say, the type of doctor who doesn't help people for a living, on the call, one thing I have found that's actually made it easier to start some of these conversations before I think someone's in an actual crisis, but I'm sort of worried about, is using the videos that we have around this. And there's a really good at endfamilyfire.org, a really good 30-second version of this video. And I've sent it to a few of my friends, and it started just a conversation about, you know, what they're concerned about, what they're worried about. And I say this is more for folks who have kids, teens, particularly college kids who are home that they're more worried about. But this was actually a very easy way to start a conversation as a non-clinician, to say like, hey, you know, I just saw this. What do you think? How can we have this conversation? And it became very natural, more friend to friend, rather than me trying to feel like I was acting almost in a role. So I think that just to say, for everyone who's not a clinician, there are good ways to start this conversation too, just in terms of like, hey, what do you think about this? And it becomes natural because we share videos and memes all the time with people, right? So it's a great, you know, there's lots of good tools, and I encourage you to check out Ted and the work that he's doing with Clinical Readiness Project. And thanks as always for the great work that PsychArmor is doing to keep us all safe, and really the connection. Heidi and Ted, I want to thank you so much. I wish we were in person so I could give you big bear hugs being done with this, you know, like talk about connection when I don't get to actually be with people I like so much. But thank you for taking the time out. To everybody who's out there, you know, stay safe, have hard conversations, and stay connected this holiday time. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
It has been an honor.
It has.
Thanks.